The third Viscount of Monckton and Brenchley, Christopher Monckton, is our guest. If you had to single one person out as the general or the George Washington of this fight against the climate criminals, the scaremongers who know it's a fraud, that want to tax and control all facets of life, it's Lord Christopher Monckton. He is the main champion, the focal point, articulating the facts, predicting the enemy's movements, and giving us the intel to devastate their operations. We've had a major victory at Copenhagen in this engagement, likening it to a naval engagement, but the enemy's main fleet is remassing to launch more attacks, circumnavigating the federal governments of the planet, going directly to the states, the counties, the cities. Schwarzenegger leading that treacherous charge here in the United States. They're also having the bureaucracies of England and the European Union and the United States ignore the people and ignore the UN wanted this treaty, wanted everybody to sign over and sign their rights over to world government and all these new taxes. They couldn't, and so now they're creating the global fund, the green fund, to go buy off government, shut down their development. Maurice Strong and others can suck more money out like they did with the oil for food program. So, sir, breaking down what really happened at Copenhagen, the dragon wounded but not slain yet, and then getting into what their current agenda is and the latest on the ClimateGate investigation, the criminal investigations that have been initiated in different parts of the globe. Sir, you have the floor. Thank you for joining us to brief our listeners.
Well, Alex, I'm going to continue with your military metaphor, and I'm going to take a kind of 3-minute time out, because I'm going to recite to you now an address which was given by Abraham Lincoln in a reedy voice, holding the paper very close to his face, on the battlefield of Gettysburg. This is what he said. 77 years ago, our fathers brought forth on this continent a new nation, conceived in liberty, and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. Now we are engaged in a great civil war, testing whether that nation or any nation so conceived and so dedicated can long endure. We are met on a great battlefield of that war. We have come to dedicate a portion of that field as a final resting place for those who here gave their lives that that nation might live. It is altogether fitting and proper that we should do this. But in a larger sense, we cannot dedicate, we cannot consecrate, we cannot hallow this ground. The brave men, living and dead, who struggled here, have consecrated it far beyond our poor power to add or detract. The world will little note nor long remember what we say here, but it can never forget what they did here. It is for us, the living, rather, to be dedicated here to the unfinished work which they who fought here have thus far so nobly advanced. It is rather for us to be here dedicated to the great task remaining before us, that from these honored dead we take increased devotion for that cause for which they gave the last full measure of devotion, that we here highly resolve that these dead shall not have died in vain, that this nation under God shall have a new birth of freedom, and that government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from the earth. Now that's what he said. And that's what I want to talk about now. Because let us suppose that there is a case for doing something about the climate. There isn't, but let's pretend there is. Let's suppose that even if there was a scientific case, there was an economic case. There isn't, but let's pretend that there is. If we're going to have multilateral action, if we're going to have a global government, then honoring what it was that those gallant men at Gettysburg died for, we want to make sure that that government shall be a government of the people, by the people, for the people. It should be an elected government. And I think that what I would like everyone who is listening today to do is to get in touch by telephone with their elected representatives, both in Congress and your senators, both your senators, and say that if we are to go any further whatsoever towards paying taxpayers' money towards this high-level panel or this Copenhagen Green Fund, these first steps towards what would have been a much grander world government unless we'd stopped it at Copenhagen, but it may still come to that. We want to make sure that if there's going to be a world government, it should be an elected world government, elected by the peoples of the world and not appointed by the bureaucrats of the world, as is at present intended. Now, I put it to you, Alex, that is a sensible point. We're saying if there is a problem with the climate, which you and I don't believe there is, if there is an economic solution to it, which you and I don't think there is, if we must have a global government, which you and I don't think we should have, then I'm sure that everybody who is a true American and a follower of Lincoln will admit that that is to be an elected government and not an appointed one. And so what we've got to do is stop this step-by-step, crab-wise approach towards global government, which is what they're now going to try to do, because so many of your listeners, Alex, got onto their senators before and said the Treaty of Copenhagen, in its original draft, which I warned you about in the World Government Provisions, shall not pass. We will not have it. So many of you actually did that the Democrat senators in particular got in touch with President Obama and said, we can't have this. We're not having it. We'll never get it through. We'll never be voted for again if we throw away the democracy for which our people at Gettysburg died, and our people are still dying for it. Our gallant troops now, yours and ours, in Afghanistan and in Iraq. And these lives must not be thrown away in vain. Government of the people, by the people, for the people, that is what the United States is all about. And any administration that tries to transfer power away from the Congress that you, the people, elect, towards some alien, bureaucratic, centralist, dismal dictatorship somewhere else, is, as you have rightly said, committing high treason and should be flung from office and impeached. Am I putting this too strongly, do you think?
No, sir. And I've noticed you have a great knowledge of our system of government here, but being a lord in your system of government, in your system, when you have Gordon Brown saying, I don't care if the nations didn't sign on to this, I'm setting up this fund, and we'll now have Europe, the UK, and the United States and Canada, New Zealand, Australia, and others, he calls them the Commonwealths, sign on to this and start putting money into what he and others have called global governance, global government. I mean, that is open tyranny. So can you speak to that specifically under your law and our law? And then to have Schwarzenegger, I know you were there, so you're aware of it, all over the news saying, well, I'm just going to have a governor's conference meet that he's calling himself, and I'm going to have a group of mayors meet, and we're going to implement this taxation system even if the Senate won't. And a week before Copenhagen ended, you said they may not get this through, but they are still going to try to implement it through the bureaucracy and through the local governments, so the federal bureaucracies and the local governments. I mean, is that not glaring sedition to have some usurping foreign-born governor running around organizing the states, and then to have Obama, who can't get the Senate to pass it, it looks like, just saying he'll just take money from the Treasury and serve it up to Ban Ki-moon and Maurice Strong? I mean, it's just outrageously, openly fraudulent and criminal.
Well, certainly under our Constitution, such as it is, and we don't have a written one like you, no money can be handed away by the government to anyone unless Parliament has authorized it. Now, the trouble is at the moment that our Parliament is a lot of poodles, and they, on both the major parties, and all three of them, the bigger parties, all believe in this climate nonsense. And if Gordon Brown says to them, never mind that our own people are starving and going bust at a record rate, we must give their money away to save the planet from this non-problem of the climate. Unfortunately, I think it's quite likely that in any budget in which he writes such a provision in, our Parliament would probably be like a poodle and just vote for it at the moment, because reality has not yet broken through among our governing class here. Now, in the United States, I'm less familiar with exactly what powers the President has under his executive authority to allocate money from the Treasury or the Fed to whatever project he fancies. But I think I'm right in saying...
Sir, it's totally illegal. He can't do it, and Congress is already saying that. 18, it was 14, now 18 attorney generals are saying they may file suit over not just that, but his health care. I mean, everything he's doing is unconstitutional.